pastor having, you know, like just a regular Sunday service, and you hear a demon in the crowd screaming while the prayers is going on.
Cat, no way.
I'll show you right now.
In the name of Jesus. I need Pastor Phil to come out here for just a second. Come on. It's okay, Brian. Keep playing. It's okay. Keep playing. It's all right. This is how real this is, ladies and gentlemen. It's okay. It's all right. In the name of Jesus, mercy, grace. I pray for my sister that she would know she's not alone. She's not alone. We pray in the name of Jesus, God. The name that can break every chain.
Obviously, you know, sometimes when you start praying and shit, demons obviously don't fucking like it.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what happened. Maybe something was like... Now, we're going to be testing our Spanish to see if we're no sabo kids or if we're yo sabo.
Solo como chicken.
¿Cómo se dice password?
Contraseña.
Yo, how the fuck you know that?
Because I know that. Bro.
One for Yaritzo.
¿Cómo se dice lightning?
Relámpago.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, bro. That's what I'm talking about, bro. ¿Cómo se dice left? This shit gotta be easy, bro.
Izquierda.
Yo, nah, I could have sworn I picked hard ones, bro.
Name this show using these two clues. Wind and flower.
La Rosa de Guadalupe. You should put that edit in, bro. If you said, I am bored, when you were younger...
Ponte limpiar. ¿Cómo se dice vacuum?
Aspiradora.
Yeah.
You thought I was going to say aspiradora?
Yeah.
What is the standard cure? All remedy recommended by grandmas.
Vaporú?
Yeah.
Solo como chicken.
If you ever start seeing this number, you might need to start praying. I'm going to try to explain this simply. This relates to the Bible. The book of Revelation, the author of the book actually sees an evil-looking creature rising from the earth in an apocalyptic vision. For years, scholars have debated exactly what that creature or thing is, but it's referred to as the beast. And the Bible's book of Revelation 13:18 reads, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man. And his number is 666. But people don't know if the beast is really the devil or if it's a demon, but it's obviously not a good sign if you start seeing 666. People also think that this number could have been somebody trying to send a coded message. And all of this ties into the plot of the new film, The First Omen, which is being released on April 5th. In the film, a woman begins to question her own faith when she uncovers a terrifying conspiracy to bring about the birth of evil incarnate in Rome. This movie's being released April 5th. I can't give away too many details about the plot, but I'm very excited for this to come out.
There's this TikToker, right? He goes by the name of Beanbag Adventures. He's just a TikToker who goes to abandoned spots and stuff, and he explores them, obviously. So there's this one building he went to, right? He basically labeled it as an underground bunker laboratory. And the first thing he notices about the spot is the smell. He's kind of creeped out because it's mad dark, smells nasty in there. He ends up following where that smell is coming from. Ends up taking him downstairs to like a room, and in that room he sees like a big ass pool. He looks over it and he sees a bunch of dead bodies. They're not regular dead bodies though.
What kind of bodies are there?
Bro, they're a bunch of little kids. What? It's a lot of them, and they're all decomposing. People are saying that it could be a hoax because he could be the one putting the bodies there, because the way they were positioned and the way they look, it doesn't look like how people think real bodies would look like. But the thing is, he ends up going there back. He ends up seeing these new bottles on the floor. It looks like they were used and stuff. They look like medical bottles. He goes around, but now the bodies are more decayed. You can see ribs, you can see a skeleton.
What? Are they in some type of liquid?
Yeah. And that blue tarp, that wasn't there either.
You think it's real or you think it's fake?
Most infamous UK missing people cases, the case of Andrew Gosden.
I've never heard of this.
On September 14th, 2007, right? It was a regular day for Andrew.
Yeah.
He was getting ready for school, but the only thing is that he actually never made it to school. He ended up taking a detour. He didn't take the school bus. He ended up going to a local like gas station and going to the ATM, and he withdrew $200 from it. He went back to his house. He changed into a Slipknot shirt, black jeans, took his PSP with him, took his house keys, and he went to the train station, right? And he was so adamant about like buying only a one-way ticket. He wasn't trying to buy no two-way ticket, even though the clerk was offering him, and it would have been cheaper if he just bought the two-way ticket instead of on just the one-way ticket, right? So he goes, it's gonna take him to London, and people saw him. There's witnesses, eyewitnesses saying that they saw him on the train, and he was like not really interacting with nobody. He was just so stuck on his PSP. There's footage of him getting out of the train station, and that's the very, very last time
That they saw him.
anybody ever saw Andrew Gosling. The theories that as to why he went missing or what might have happened, since he wasn't sociable at school, he wasn't really like a person who had that many friends, but he loved gaming, is that possibly he met somebody online through video games and shit like that, and maybe he went to go meet up with them, but he ended up meeting the wrong person.
This is one of the worst ways somebody has ever died. In October 2012, an awful and disturbing thing happened. A 62-year-old employee at Bumblebee Foods named Jose Molina was having a normal day in the Bumblebee facility in California. In his schedule, Jose was tasked with the performance maintenance on an 11-meter long industrial oven, so he went inside one of the tanks to begin his work. Believing that Jose was in the bathroom, one of his coworkers actually shut the tank's door, trapping Jose inside, and then filled the oven with 5,400 kilograms of tuna and then turned the oven on. A search then ensued when the manager realized Jose was missing, but by then it was way too late. They found Jose's body 2 hours later inside the oven, completely burnt and melted away, 100% unrecognizable. The temperature inside the oven reached 270 degrees Fahrenheit, and Jose was unfortunately cooked alive inside of the tank with all the fish. And you could only imagine how horrific this death actually was. Could you imagine being cooked alive and then being crushed by tens to thousands of pounds of fish, mixed with the smell, the texture, the heat? This death was just awful. The company Bumblebee and 2 managers were actually charged for this death, and the company got off with a $6 million settlement. But do you think $6 million is way too low for a death like this? Many people believe it should have been more close to $50 million. Nonetheless, this is by far one of the worst and most uncomfortable deaths of all time, and I can't imagine Jose's thoughts as he was being cooked alive with hundreds of fish.
Don't mind the pain on my hand. So anyhow, so she makes these sounds when you touch that button. However, it's supposed to be for when she sits. However,
The Trolls doll that you just saw ignited an internet firestorm. And for just cause. So essentially, this was a Trolls World Tour doll sold by Hasbro back in 2020. And as you saw in that video, when you touched the troll doll's private area, it giggled and let out an excited little yelp. Now, obviously, parents that saw this were really concerned and claimed that it promoted pedophilia and child abuse. And parents felt that it was wildly inappropriate that when you touched this troll doll's private area, it let out those excited sounds. A Change.org petition was actually started back when this whole thing was going wild on social media, and it garnered over 300,000 signatures. That should show you that this is an issue that a lot of parents actually cared about. Hasbro eventually issued an apology and stated that they were pulling these dolls from the shelves. But my question is, how did something like this actually make it out of the warehouse, out of development, onto shelves? Did not one person in that entire massive multinational corporation stop and think, this is kind of weird? I don't know. This story just leaves kind of a bad taste in my mouth. But I am glad that at the end of the day, this was exposed and these toys were pulled from the shelves.
The story of the School of Rock pedophile is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read about. Meet Jason James Murphy, a former Hollywood casting agent who, before he worked as a casting agent for children, had been convicted of one of the most terrible crimes I've read about. So when Jason was just 19 years old, he was in college at the time, he kidnapped an 8-year-old boy, held him hostage, and repeatedly assaulted him. He had met the boy while he was working as a camp counselor, and he eventually served 5 years in prison, and was obviously required to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. But in 2005, just a few years after Jason got out of prison, he moved to California, and that's when he started working in Hollywood. Jason was a casting agent for a number of huge films. He worked by helping to cast the children in the film School of Rock. He also helped to cast the film Cheaper by the Dozen, which obviously has a lot of kids in it. And he worked on a number of different movies, including stuff like Super 8 by J.J. Abrams. Now, apparently, people didn't really know about his past, which I think is really strange, because if they were actually doing background checks on the people that they hired, they would see that this man had served 5 years in prison. But in 2011, he was rearrested for failing to file a name change. Now, he was arrested again in 2011 after he had worked on all of these movies because he failed to file a name change and a change of address with the government. But he had apparently been working for years under a different name.
And I mean, this guy was trying to outrun his sordid past, but with such a horrible crime that you've committed, you can never outrun that. And I don't know if he's still working with Hollywood, working around kids, but I really hope that he's not.
A mother changes the batteries on her son's talking Elmo doll and is stunned to hear what comes out of its mouth. You will be too. James? James? That's right. The Elmo doll is saying, kill James.
What you just saw is a very real news story from 2008. I'm going to play you the rest of the news report at the end of this TikTok, but basically, a mother in Florida in 2008 changed the batteries on her son's Elmo doll. And her son's name was James, so apparently these Elmo dolls had a feature where you could plug it into your computer and upload your child's name. So she uploaded the name James. But after they changed the batteries, the Elmo started repeating the phrase, kill James. Now, James's mom had no idea why this was happening, and obviously she was really freaked out by this. She even said that her young son repeated the phrase so many times that he started saying out loud, kill James himself. Now, this is just kind of absolutely freaky. And something a little bit disturbing, I know this seems comical, but something disturbing that comes out of this story is this was never explained. Hasbro never officially released any sort of a statement. They just said that they would give her a full refund if she would like. But after doing some research, I couldn't find any conclusion to this story. Only a few news reports that were widely publicized and got a lot of attention. So this begs a question, was this phrase pre-programmed into the Elmo dolls? Did James's mother accidentally purchase a possessed Elmo doll from hell? Was Elmo really making death threats towards young James? I guess these are questions that we may never have answers to.
That's right. The Elmo doll is saying, kill James. That's the name of the boy who owns the Elmo Knows Your Name doll. You plug it into the computer so it will repeat the child's name. Well, the doll ran out of batteries, so the mom replaced them. That's when it started making death threats.
Whomever coined the phrase, you can't make this stuff up, might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This is just horrifying. In 2011, Daniel Bartlett, who was 14 years old at the time, ran out of his burning house with his younger brother and dog. They waited for the emergency services to arrive, and when the police questioned Daniel, he told them that someone had broken into the house and harmed his mother and then set the house on fire. But after this initial statement, Daniel told the police the very disturbing and sickening truth. He said that he crept into his mother's room at night with a claw hammer in his hand. He then stood over his own mother while she slept, and as he looked down on her, he raised the hammer and hit her in the head 7 times. And after he was done, he poured gasoline around her bedroom and then set the house on fire. The disturbing thing is, Daniel's mother was only identified through her dental records, and as the police searched the house, they found the hammer used in the attack in Daniel's bedroom. They also found a document on his computer where he written a story featuring a character with his name. Another disturbing part about this case was that a popular TV show in the UK called Coronation Street had recently showed a story where one of the characters murdered a woman with a hammer, and the storyline in the TV show resembled a striking resemblance of what Daniel had done. The police also found TV clips of the scene from the episode of Coronation Street, along with other violent scenes from the popular TV films on Daniel's computer. The media then gave Daniel the nickname the Coronation Street Killer. Daniel's stepfather had also spoken about Daniel's behavior before the awful incident took place, and he said that he had plastic boxes full of Star Wars and Doctor Who figures, and Daniel would just urinate in the boxes. Daniel also defecated all over his bedroom, and what's strange is Daniel was raised by his mother in a very stable home, and by all accounts, Daniel was a normal young boy. The family had moved to a different area in 2009, and that's the year he began to become more reclusive, spending most of his time in his bedroom playing video games and watching horror films. His stepfather blamed the video games and the horror films on why Daniel murdered, but I don't believe that at all. Daniel said that he killed his mother because of an argument that they had, and she called him a freak. But with no evidence of abuse in the home, the motive is still unclear. Daniel was found guilty of murder. This whole case is just sad, especially because everyone that knew Daniel's mother said that she lived for her children and was a warm, loving mother.
What would you do if you found a human head in a plastic bag? It was the 28th of April 2007. A fisherman was minding his own business in the Everglades in Florida. Now, the area is huge and it has been described as the largest subtropical wilderness in the United States. Chillingly, this sometimes makes the wetlands a perfect place to dispose of a dead body. The waters are teeming with alligators, desperate to get their hands on anything that they can eat. On the day in question, the fisherman had a horrific fright. He noticed something in the water, and it turned out to be a human head in a plastic shopping bag. The bag was soaked in blood. The fisherman obviously rang police, and they raced to the scene. After collecting the head, they tried to identify the individual, who had obviously been a victim of a homicide. However, this was incredibly hard. The main clue was the type of shopping bag that the head had been placed in. Now, this was a shop that only had stores in New York. Now, the police linked in with the police in New York to see whether they had found maybe a headless body. A forensic anthropologist also took a look at the head to determine any identifiable factors. Now, she could tell that the head belonged to a white woman between 20 and 40 years old. Horrifically, she was able to tell that the head had been removed from the victim's body while they were still alive. Then there was a breakthrough. A witness reported overhearing two men at a motel that they were staying at bragging about murdering a woman. They were Paul Tricchiero and Robert Mackey. The men had also been seen acting suspiciously. They took a truck to a junkyard and were seen removing the license plate. This truck was identified as belonging to a woman. This was 41-year-old Lorraine Hatzakorian. She was from Long Island in New York and had been missing around a week. Now, Lorraine was a hard-working single mum, so why would they want to cause her any harm? Was this just a random attack? Did they not know her at all? It turned out Lorraine did in fact know these men. They worked for the same tree-cutting company. It's believed that they got into an argument over some equipment to do with the company. When Lorraine tried to drive off with the equipment, it's believed that they brutally murdered her. Both men were given 30 years behind bars. This terrifying case will put you off ever babysitting again. It was 1977 in the beautiful area of Colorado Springs, USA. 14-year-old Maria Honzel was in desperate need of some extra pocket money, and what better way to earn some money than to babysit for a neighbour? She would often look after her neighbour Janie's children to earn some extra cash. She was more than happy to do so again. Janie's sons were 8 and 6, and they were really easy to look after for the evening. They lived in North Nevada Avenue, which was a nice quiet community where things out of the ordinary rarely took place. On the 7th of February that year, Janie went out for the evening, leaving Maria in charge. Now, Janie made sure to keep ringing the teenager just to check in and ensure that everything was okay at the house. She spoke to her just a couple of hours before getting in at around 11:15. Horrifically, when she arrived home, she was faced with something out of a horror film. The house was eerily silent. Janie immediately felt that something was wrong. She crept through the house, wondering where her babysitter was. Then she got a hideous fright. In the master bedroom lay Maria's bloodied dead body. It was clear she'd been stabbed in a vicious attack. Police were alerted, and Janie desperately went to see where her children were. Now, thankfully, they were unharmed and asleep. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, so police started wondering whether Maria actually knew her killer. The eldest of Janie's sons actually was able to provide a witness statement. He said that he did see a teenage boy wrestling with Maria into the bedroom. He seemed to be holding his hand over her face. He provided a detailed description of this teenager, but unfortunately nobody was identified. Forensic teams collected a blood stain from Maria's clothing. Unfortunately, at the time, the technology wasn't really there to do anything with it. That was until years later. In 2019, the police department decided to reopen the cold case. Then, after another few years, they finally got a match on the DNA on the clothing. The killer was identified as William Kernan Jr. Now, Maria knew him, and he had actually been interviewed initially in the case. However, he was never deemed a suspect. He unfortunately ended up dying of natural causes before he could face justice for the grisly crime. However, knowing who killed Maria at least did provide her family with some sort of closure. This man committed mass murder because he was attracted to trees. It was the 10th of November 2010 in Apple Valley, Ohio. I believe the date from this photo is actually incorrect and the camera was set wrong. Now, the neighborhood was a quiet one and things out of the ordinary rarely happened. That was until emergency services received a disturbing phone call. Local Dairy Queen manager rang to report 32-year-old Tina Herman as missing. The single mum had failed to show up for work, which was incredibly unusual. She was a great mum to 13-year-old Sarah and 11-year-old Cody pictured here. Police started doing some digging and figured out that Tina and her boyfriend Greg had actually been having problems. Her friend told police that she was actually due to move out of the house. Officers went round to the property to see if anything was wrong. Now, frustratingly, they didn't actually go in and they couldn't really see anything was up. However, they were a little bit unnerved to be told that the children had never turned up at school. The following day, Tina's manager decided to take matters into her own hands. She went into Tina's house and discovered a horrific scene. She rang police, frantically shouting that there was blood everywhere. Disturbingly, there were 3 pools of blood and drag marks along the floor. The bath had blood in that was 2 inches deep. However, there were 2 sets of footprints on the floor in blood, one seemingly matching young Sarah's footprints. Did this mean she got out alive? Now, police interviewed Tina's boyfriend, who seemingly had an alibi. He was actually at work, and this alibi checked out. Now, investigators started looking into the bin bags and tarp that were found at Tina's home. Turned out that these had been purchased from a local Walmart. Now, Walmart reported that somebody did actually purchase those items around midnight. They identified the male on CCTV and traced his car in the car park. He was Matthew Hoffman. He was a local man who'd also been charged with burglary previously. A SWAT team showed up at his house and arrested him. Shockingly, they found Sarah tied up and gagged under a pile of leaves in the cellar. The poor child told officers that her and her brother had been ambushed by the random man when they came home from school. He had tied up the young girl and SA'd her. Horrifically, Matthew admitted to police that he'd killed Tina and her son, as well as her friend Stephanie. Now, Stephanie was Tina's friend who'd simply gone round to try and help her move out. Matthew hid the dead bodies in a hollow tree. A psychologist stated that it was likely that Matthew had dendrophilia, a S attraction to trees. This would also explain all of the leaves in the house. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
This man was trapped in his car for 2 months. In Sweden, there is a city called Umeå, and surrounding it are deep forests, and a popular hobby people have living here is snowmobiling. In 2012, at the end of February, a man was on his snowmobile riding on one of the many trails in the forest when he suddenly noticed a massive snow pile a little off the trail. He had his helmet on and his visor down, so he couldn't quite make out what the snow pile was. But as he got closer, he realized it was a car buried underneath the snow. The snow was all the way up to the roof, and there was 3 feet of snow on the roof of the car. The windows were completely iced up, so it was definitely there for some time. The man then parked his snowmobile and started walking through the waist-deep snow towards the car. Once there, he began to scrape some of the ice off the windows. When there was a big enough hole for him to see inside, he peered inside the car, and all over the interior he could see ice caked up against the glass, the dashboard, literally everything inside the car. There was also food wrappers and garbage all over the seats and floor. Then, all of a sudden, something moved in the back seat. The man was then shocked to see someone lying in the back seat in a sleeping bag staring back at him through the icy window. He then called emergency services, and they quickly arrived in the scene and pulled a bony man from the car who could barely move or speak. As they got him out of the car, he was so weak he could barely even communicate with them, but he would manage to get out the words, "Haven't eaten and stuck here since December 19th. But that wouldn't have made sense because the day he was found was February 20th, and that means he would have been stuck in the car for over 2 months. And for some of that time, the temperature outside was as low as negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit. At first, this seemed just impossible, but as the man recovered in the hospital and was given fluids and food, he was able to recall what happened. Apparently, back in December, he was driving around the forest trail and accidentally went too far and got his car trapped in the snow. And rather than walk out of the forest and try and find someone to help, he decided to just stay in his car. At first, he used the car's heater to stay warm, but eventually he ran out of gasoline. But by that point, the car was covered in enough snow that it kind of formed an igloo around the car. He also had warm enough clothes and a sleeping bag that was able to keep him warm enough to survive. Additionally, he had some snacks that he brought, but those ran out quickly, so he had to survive off melted snow for water ever since. By the time he was found by the snowmobiler, he was extremely malnourished and succumbing to hypothermia, meaning if he was found any later, he would have been dead. During those 2 months, he had lost 50 pounds, but he would make a full recovery in the hospital. There are also many pictures of the inside and outside of the car, as you can see on your screen right now.
This is one of Hollywood's worst pedophiles, and even after his conviction, he was still allowed to work around children. To give you a quick rundown, this is Brian Peck. He's been in a number of movies, including Return of the Living Dead, where he played the character Scuzz. This is a very famous 80s horror zombie movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I definitely have seen it, and I definitely recognize this guy. Well, apparently at one point in his life, Brian Peck decided to start giving people acting lessons from his own home. And yes, he gave acting lessons to young underage kids, specifically a lot of young underage boys. This brings us to 2004, when Brian Peck was convicted of a lewd act against a child and oral copulation with a child under the age of 16. Here's his actual sex offender registration. Apparently, according to the court documents, Brian had been coaching this young boy in acting at his home, in his residence. And that's where all of this went down. This all would have been swept under the rug, too, if the child's parents hadn't reported Brian Peck to the police and had him arrested. Now, what's interesting is that he was originally charged with 11 counts, but was only convicted of 2. I'm just going to read these to you guys. The documents show Peck was originally charged with lewd act upon a child, sodomy of a person under 16, attempted sodomy, sexual penetration by a foreign object, 4 counts of oral copulation of a person under 16, oral copulation by anesthesia or controlled substance, and sending harmful matter, and using a minor for sex acts. That's a lot of counts. Eventually, he was convicted. He then had to serve a very minuscule 16 months in jail, and he was let out. And guess where he went back to? Hollywood. And guess who took him back in with open arms? Hollywood. After his conviction and after he served his sentence, Brian Peck actually went to work on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. This is kind of insane. And he was allowed to work on this show because of some weird legal loophole. Basically, he was banned from working directly with children, having direct contact with children, but he wasn't prohibited from actually working on productions that involved children. This was obviously seen as really problematic when people around the internet began to figure out that Brian was actually a convicted sex offender with an offense against a child. And to my knowledge, he was eventually let go. I don't know what he works as currently. He worked on some other big-budget Hollywood shows in the last couple of years. And he still regularly appears at horror movie conventions and other horror-related events where he takes pictures with people, probably their families too, and signs autographs, which I think is just kind of really disturbing. And it should be noted that although the identity of the person that Brian abused has never been revealed publicly, it has been stated that they were a major star at Nickelodeon at the time. So I don't know who that would be, but it's just a sad story all around. And I cannot believe that they would still choose to work with this guy even after his convictions. I mean, it's insane. I also want to add in here that I actually made that video about a year ago. So I was talking about this stuff way back when. So if you want to keep up to date with things that are happening like this, if you want to help me raise awareness about these crimes and the people that are getting away with them, make sure you give me a follow and share out these videos when you can, because only together can we put a stop to this horrific shit that keeps happening here, not only in America, but across the world. Okay, I have an honest question. Does anybody on here remember ElsaGate? Like the weird conspiracy thing that people were sending children subliminal messages through kids' YouTube videos? I mean, I remember I was really enthralled with all of that because a lot of those videos were actually really bizarre and really disturbing. But I feel like there was never any clear or concise answer on exactly what the fuck was going on with all of that. So yeah, does anybody have any information about what happened to ElsaGate, or if anybody ever faced any consequences for putting all this weird shit into kids' minds on YouTube? That was truly just a bizarre and disturbing situation, and yeah, if you guys want me to make a rundown of exactly what ElsaGate is, let me know and I can do it.
Was killed for a sweatpants when I was only 17. My name is Brian, and I'm a 17-year-old French boy. It all happened on December 8, 2023, when I went to a park to sell my Nike jogging suit. When I got there, there were 6 people in balaclavas with the intention of taking the sweatpants suit without paying. I defended myself as best I could, and one of the assailants stabbed me in the thigh. They then fled with the jogging suit, despite over an hour of cardiac massage. I succumbed to my injuries. My attacker confided that he had gone home crying. He told his mother that he had done something horrible. He is racked with guilt and is said to have threatened suicide. I died because I just wanted to sell a jogging suit to make a little pocket money. My life was turned upside down. I had my whole life ahead of me. My family is completely shattered. For the moment, no one has been tried for my murder. What sentence do you think they deserves?
This is the scariest story about the new parents, and it's absolutely chilling. There was a kid named Michael who was coming downstairs for breakfast one morning. When he sat down at the table to eat, his mom and dad both looked at him and said good morning. Michael then said good morning back, but they continued to talk to him. Michael then noticed that something just wasn't right. He noticed his parents were never this nice, especially in the morning. He then asked them if they were okay, and they both looked at him with a smile on their face and said, "Yes, honey, of course we are." Michael then finished breakfast and went back upstairs. But as he was walking back to his room, he noticed that one of the hallway doors was cracked open a little bit. Michael then went over to close it when he suddenly smelled something absolutely terrible. He then opened the door, and what he saw made his stomach drop to the floor. Inside were his mom and dad's dead body with their throats slit and multiple stab wounds all around their body. Michael then heard a voice behind him say, "You were never supposed to see that. Now we have to do it to you."
19-year-old man raped me when I was 98 years old. On March 3rd, 2018, while I was living in Guadeloupe and preparing to go to sleep, I went to do my nightly routine, then entered my bedroom. Unbeknownst to me, Jean-Francois was hiding behind a curtain in my room, waiting for the right moment to act. As I entered the room, he decided to attack, jumping on me and raping me before fleeing immediately. Unfortunately, I couldn't do anything. His face was covered with a white scarf, so I immediately contacted the police and a DNA sample was taken. However, it did not yield any results to find my assailant. For 3 years, the case remained unsolved until 2021, when the DNA that the investigators had collected matched that of a certain Jean-Francois, already known for 2 previous rapes. He had a tattoo on his face, hence his need to hide his face with a white scarf. He was then arrested on Tuesday, April 18, 2023, in Paris, but he denies being the perpetrator of my rape. However, the evidence suggests otherwise. What punishment does he deserve?
Killed my sister when she was only 4 years old to hurt my mother. My name is Paris Bennett, and I was only 13 at the time. I lived in Texas, and as a child, I played a lot with my little sister. I loved her very much. However, one day in 2007, my mother left us with a babysitter while she went to work. I convinced the babysitter that I could take care of my sister on my own, so she left. And that's when the project I'd been planning for a long time began. I suffocated her, abused her, and finally ended my sister's life by stabbing her 17 times with a kitchen knife. But murdering my sister was more complicated than I imagined. I knew I'd go to prison, but I also knew that with the loss of her precious children, my mother would suffer far more than if I killed her. So shortly afterwards, I called the police and told them I'd killed my sister by mistake. I told them I'd had a hallucination. But after a while, I confessed to having committed a calculated crime. I was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years, the maximum sentence for a minor.
These parents killed their kids because they thought they would come back to life. Okay, so it was late COVID period, and the older sister Alicia, who was 27, learned some superstition rituals online and read many books, and she started taking it extremely seriously and convinced her parents and younger sister to believe her. Now, there's 2 sides of the story that could have happened. One, the parents believed the 2 daughters were possessed by some spirits, and they just killed them hoping they'd come back to life. And the other and most popular one is that Alicia convinced both of her parents to kill her and her sister because they would come back to life. The parents then bludgeoned their 2 daughters to death, believing full-heartedly that they would come back to life within 24 hours. Her younger sister was hit in the head to death by a dumbbell, and Alicia was killed by a trident. And after killing both of their kids, the parents just patiently waited for their daughters to come back to life. That's when the police walked in on the gruesome scene and arrested them. This might just sound so insane you might not believe that people could actually do something like this, but it was a time in the world where everything was extremely fragile and nobody knew what was going on. So this family literally just went down a rabbit hole on rituals and spells, and completely believed it and acted on it. This case is extremely disturbing, and I know a bunch of you have never heard about it, so let's talk about it.
I'm the first priest to be executed in the electric chair. My name is Hans Schmidt. I was born in Germany in 1881. Motivated by my family from an early age, I began my journey to become a priest. Already a priest, I moved to the United States in 1909 when I was 28. It was there that I met Anna Oymüller, a new housekeeper at my church. It was love at first sight. I began a secret relationship with Anna. As you know, in my day, to be a priest you had to practice celibacy. Not only did I break my vow of chastity, I married her in secret. I was the priest of my own secret marriage, something completely forbidden by the church. But the real problem began when Anna got pregnant. This double life caused me great confusion. She was very excited by the news, but with a child it would be impossible for me to maintain my double life, and I would have to abandon the church. On September 2, 1913, I chose God. That day, I waited for Anna to fall asleep so I could cut her throat. Then I cut her body into pieces. I wrapped it in sheets and threw it into a nearby river. A week later, Anna's body was found by children playing in the river, and a few days later I was arrested because the sheets I'd used to wrap Anna's body had come from an expensive New York store, and only a few had been sold. I was sentenced to the electric chair.
This bride-to-be was shot to death on her wedding day. After looking forward to this day for her whole life, Gladys Rickard was brimming with excitement. It was the 26th of September 1999, and she looked absolutely stunning in her wedding dress. She was taking photos in her living room with her bridesmaids. The 39-year-old was preparing to get into a limo which would take her to marry her fiancé, accountant James Preston Jr., although tragically she would never make it down the aisle. Gladys had previously dated a man named Augustin Garcia. They had begun dating back in 1992, but he'd been abusive to her and cheated on her, so she left. Although she had clearly met someone new and had moved on, Augustin had been stalking her. Gladys had to report this to the police one day when Augustin turned up at her house and was banging on the windows and doors. In a horrific foreshadowing of events to occur, one day Augustin left a Bible and white flowers on her front lawn. Now, in the Dominican community, this apparently symbolises death. Before Gladys was able to leave the house on her wedding day, Augustin burst in. He had driven from his home in Washington Heights and opened fire at Gladys. She was shot several times before Augustin had to try and reload his weapon. Gladys's brother bravely tackled him to the ground and held him there until police arrived. Sadly, it was too late for Gladys. Augustin was given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This man ran up to a building, banging on the windows, screaming, "Help me, I'm gonna die." He was killed by the last person anyone expected. Grant Wilson was a 34-year-old Uber driver from Illinois. He had gone to a Walmart in Stokey on the 30th of May 2017, just after 3 a.m. to collect a passenger. He was actually already just a block away, so it was quite a quick trip for him to just go to that store. The passenger was 16-year-old Eliza Wasney. She'd actually got a different Uber already to that Walmart just prior to 3 a.m, and what the police found later on CCTV stunned them. She had calmly walked through the store, picked up a knife and a machete, and left without paying. After leaving, she had requested Grant's Uber and he picked her up. Not long into this second journey, Eliza launched an unprovoked attack on him. He fled the vehicle covered in blood after being hacked with the weapons. He ran up to a condo and desperately banged on the windows and doors, pleading for help. He had multiple injuries to the right side of his arm, torso, head and chest. Police raced to the scene and found Grant almost unconscious. He told police what had happened and described his attacker, and then was rushed to hospital where he sadly passed away. Meanwhile, police were on a desperate hunt to find his killer. Now, there was a trail of blood leading to Grant's crashed car. They found Eliza a block away, dressed in just a bra and leggings, holding her bloody weapons. She refused to drop them, so she was tasered and arrested. She was charged with first-degree murder and strangely had no history of violence prior. She was given 27 years in prison and has never revealed the motive for her attack. Imagine you're having a normal takeaway evening with a friend. Moments after you wave them off, they're killed. 18-year-old Kim Newson from Lincoln was reported missing by her dad on March the 7th, 2002. Her last known movements had been in the early hours of March the 5th. She had been with her friend Mandy that night. The pair had bought a takeaway from Charcoal Grill in Clasket Gate and then eating kebabs together at Mandy's house. From CCTV, police were able to see that the pair had gone to Mandy's at 1:48 a.m. Kim had then left Mandy's house and gone back to her flat on Monks Road between 2:30 a.m. and 2:45 a.m. It was only roughly 100 yards back to her home, but unfortunately this would be the last journey that Kim would make. It was a complete mystery what had happened to the teenager. A month later, Stephen Hughes was arrested in connection with an unrelated case. Shockingly, police actually found Kim's birth certificate with his bloodied footprint on it in his coat pocket. It transpired that on her short walk home, Stephen had actually hit Kim in the head with an axe. He then dragged her body back to his flat. There, he chopped up her body and dumped her in the river with them. Heartbreakingly, at this time, she was actually pregnant. Stephen tried and failed to cover up his crime. He'd gone to the trouble of cleaning and even redecorating his flat, but it was no match for forensic science. Traces of her blood were found in tiles in the flat. He was sentenced to life in prison, and in 2019, he died in hospital.
This is one of the scariest and saddest stories that I've heard in a while. This is Ross MacDonald. He was an Irish filmmaker and Emmy-winning director and cinematographer. Ross went missing on the evening of November 4th of this year. He was last seen leaving his Brooklyn apartment riding his bike. When he didn't return home or have any contact with his friends or family, he was reported missing. Shortly after, the New York Police Department found Ross's bike locked up at Fort Tilden Beach in Queens, and it truly seemed as if he vanished into thin air. But on November 17th, police responded to a call at Breezy Point Beach, and when they arrived, they walked into a gruesome scene. There on the beach, laying in the sand, was a headless and armless torso with just its legs attached. It was very clear that the body was dismembered, and the head and arms have still not been located. Based on a distinctive birthmark and a pair of red Adidas swim trunks, the body was determined to belong to Ross, and other pieces of his clothing were also found on the beach. Although his cause of death has not yet been determined, police do not suspect any foul play. They've also stated that there is no indication of suicide. A lot of people are suspicious of these findings because Ross's body was dismembered, but according to the NYPD, they believe that Ross went for a swim that night and simply drowned. And they believe that since he was in the water for 2 weeks, he was dismembered by the strong tides, sharp rocks, and marine life. According to Ross's friends, it wasn't unusual for him to go for evening swims, so that paired with the fact that other pieces of his clothing were washed ashore has led authorities to believe he just went for a swim that night and was overtaken by the current. Of course, this is still ongoing and the police are still investigating the case, but this is extremely scary and sad for Ross and his friends and family.
Have you ever wondered what it would look like if 8 billion humans stood side by side? Well, if so, then watch this video.
these children did to a teenager in Ireland is absolutely shocking. Anastasia Kriegel, known as Anna, was a Russian-Irish teenager. It was 2018 and she was 14 years old at the time. She was born in Russia and had been placed in an orphanage. She'd then been adopted by a couple in Ireland. She grew up there and seemed happy, but her life was far from plain sailing from then on. She actually had a tumour that she had to have removed from her right ear, which left her almost deaf. She also had issues with her vision. She struggled at school and cruel children bullied her for being adopted. On the 14th of May 2018, things would get even more dark. Now, Anna had actually been trying to go to counselling sessions to try and help her cope. On the day in question, she went to her counselling session after school and got changed. She then had a visitor at around 5 p.m. that evening, which her mum knew was unusual. Anna didn't really have friends that would come to call for her. Now, the boy who came to the house is known as only Boy B. He's believed to have come to the house to lure Anna to the park to meet another teen who is called Boy A. She walked with Boy B and the pair were captured on CCTV. They headed over to an abandoned house on a nearby farm. She was last seen alive at 5:30 p.m. in St. Catherine's Park. Tragically, on the 17th of May, Anna's body was found in that abandoned building near Lucan. She was found unclothed and her cause of death was blunt force trauma. The autopsy showed signs that she'd been SA'd and she had tape round her neck. Anna's mum told the police of the boy who had come to the house for Anna, and police soon arrested the two boys A and B. Luckily, there was plenty of DNA evidence at the scene and on Anna to help them identify the boys. They couldn't be named during the trial due to only being 13 years old and were granted a lifelong anonymity. It transpired that Boy A SA'd Anna as Boy B watched. Then Boy A attacked her and they both fled. They were actually the youngest people in the history of the Republic of Ireland to be charged with murder. Boy A got life with a review after 12 years and Boy B got 15 years with a review after 8.
These are the most disturbing cartel execution videos on the internet, part 1. This video is called Ghost Rider, and it's one of the most infamous cartel execution videos, and I really don't recommend looking or searching for it because it's 100% one of the worst. The video was recorded in September 2020, and the victim's name is Ghost Rider, and he was apparently tortured over 3 days. And he was subjected to some of the worst acts of violence you will ever see. The video is about 2 minutes long, and it begins with Ghost Rider already in a horrible state. It appears his face has already been flayed, which means skinned, and what the killers do next is absolutely horrible. They get rubbing alcohol and pour it on his face, and keep in mind, his face has already been skinned, so just imagine the stinging pain. We all put rubbing alcohol on cuts, and we all know how bad it hurts. So just imagine having your face skinned and then somebody pours rubbing alcohol all over it. After this, the killers then set Ghost Rider's face on fire, and his face is then completely covered in flames and is absolutely melting away right before your eyes. You hear the cartel members laughing and mocking him as he burns and his face melts. Ghost Rider is letting out blood-curdling screams as the flames continue. The video then skips to later on in the day or a couple days later, and Ghost Rider has been tortured and burned so severely that his whole head is basically a red skull. There's no skin, there's no hair, there's no facial features, you can't even see his eyes. And after all of this, he is still alive. At the end of the video, they tell him to raise his head, which he does, which confirms he was still alive, and I have no idea how somebody can live through all of this torture. They then set his head on fire again to make him look like Ghost Rider with his burning skull. And seeing his exposed red skull burning is a very disturbing sight. Apparently the guy was nicknamed Ghost Rider because he would do the same thing to people that he caught, which was the main reason they killed him in this exact way. This video is just horrible and extremely gruesome, and it's a video you should definitely stay curious on because in my opinion, it's that bad.
If you notice anything strange about this picture of these Nottingham newlyweds, Debbie Starbuck was last seen alive 6 days after her wedding. It was April 2010 and the new bride was just 41 years old. She'd got married to 36-year-old Jamie Starbuck, and as you can see in their pictures from their wedding, they were beaming. However, just a week after this photo was taken, Debbie faced a tragic end. Jamie was divorced and met Debbie online. The pair lived together in a house in Nottingham. Debbie was self-employed, and after her mum sadly passed away, she inherited over £100,000. Debbie's friends and family alerted police to a potential problem 2 years after last seeing her. They hadn't actually heard from Debbie properly in a while. They'd had a few emails from her here and there, but hadn't actually spoken to her on the phone. After Debbie and Jamie had got married, they believed that the pair had gone abroad. Investigators started looking into the pair's whereabouts and found that Debbie's passport had actually expired. Interestingly, money had been transferred from Debbie's account to Jamie's. Police discovered that Jamie was living a lavish life, travelling all over the world, but there was no sign of Debbie. It transpired that Jamie had travelled to a total of 32 countries within 31 months. He'd left the UK to travel to Amsterdam in 2010 just after his wedding and was keeping a travel blog. He documented his travels and apparently what him and Debbie were up to. Now, his wife's family were also receiving emails from her, and by the sounds of things, she was living a absolutely dream life. In Jamie's final blog post, he wrote, "I left the UK a long time ago in search of, well, in all honesty, I was running away from life and responsibility, justice and my past." It turned out he'd been using his wife's passwords to pose as her and make it out like she was still alive when he knew she was dead. He'd killed her a week after their wedding, dismembered her and then burned her remains. Shockingly, police found an entry in his computer stating, "I had planned for it to be quick. I never expected you to be so durable." He had spent his deceased wife's money on his lavish travels and subsequently was arrested. Police captured him as he stepped off a plane from Brazil. He was jailed for life.
Stephen A. Marshall was a 20-year-old vigilante murderer who some have dubbed the pedophile killer. Stephen lived a pretty normal life. His family separated when he was younger. He was born in Texas. But at the time of the murders, he had been living in Nova Scotia, Canada for years, which is very close to Maine, where his father lived and where the murders would eventually take place. Now, one day in 2006, Stephen went AWOL. He kind of disappeared. He took all of the money out of his bank account and he drove to Maine to, quote, visit his father. But it turns out that Stephen had actually looked up the Maine sex offenders registry, had taken down information on 29 of the sex offenders, and had created almost a hit list of people he wanted to take out. Shortly before the murders happened, Stephen had converted to Christianity and he had referred to pedophiles to some of his friends as scum of the earth. His first target was a man named Joseph Gray, pictured here, who was 57 years old. He had been previously convicted of sexually assaulting a child under the age of 14, and for some reason, Stephen chose him to be the first victim. He showed up to Joseph's house out in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night and shot him to death on his couch. Before he was murdered, Joseph had fallen asleep watching Forensic Files, which is just an interesting twist because that's a show about murder and solving crimes. But Stephen wasn't done that night. He still had more targets to hit. At 8 o'clock the next morning, he showed up to 24-year-old William Elliott's trailer home. He knocked on the door, and when William answered, he shot him to death. William had been previously convicted of having sex with a girl who was 16 years old when he was 19. It was his girlfriend, and that had landed him on the sex offender registry. So in just one night, Stephen Marshall had taken out both of these men, and he then boarded a bus to go to another location. Police were quickly able to identify Stephen as the killer because the girlfriend of one of the victims had taken a photo of his license plate after the killings. And when the police stopped the bus that he was on board, he pulled out a pistol and took his own life. When all was said and done and the police looked at his laptop, they discovered that he had scoped out the houses of 4 other predators that were on that sex offenders list. Who knows how many more murders he was planning on carrying out or could have carried out if he hadn't been apprehended at that time. If you like true crime, you can listen to my wife and I's podcast, Murder in America. It's on all streaming platforms, or you can check out my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files.
This is a story that everyone should know. This is Lizbeth Medina. She was a 16-year-old high school cheerleader who was found stabbed to death in her bathtub on December 5th. This is everything we know so far. On December 5th, Lizbeth's mom became worried about her after she didn't show up for an annual lighted Christmas parade in Edna, Texas. Lizbeth was supposed to be marching in the parade with her cheer squad, and when her mom couldn't find her, she rushed back to their home around 7 p.m. at the Cottonwood Apartments, and it was there that she discovered a gruesome scene. Lizbeth had been stabbed to death, and she was left in her bathtub. It was clear that she had been getting ready for the parade, and she was still in her pajamas. Edna police started looking for any leads because Lizbeth was just 16 years old. She didn't have any enemies, and this completely shocked the small community. Authorities soon discovered grainy surveillance footage of a possible suspect in the area, and they also disclosed a vehicle of interest, which was a silver Ford Taurus. Finally, on Saturday, police were given a tip which sent them to the small town of Schulenburg, Texas, and it was there that they arrested 23-year-old Rafael Romero at his family home. Authorities have confirmed that Raphael does own a silver Ford Taurus, which they've seized evidence from linking him to Lisbeth. According to Edna police, Raphael has been living in Texas illegally on an expired visa, while his family has been living in Schulenburg for about 5 years. At this point, police have not discovered a motive for the killing, and they're trying to figure out if the two even knew each other. But they are saying that it is an isolated incident. Lisbeth's family has stated that they don't recognize Raphael or his family at all, but they do wonder if this was possibly related to a recent break-in attempt. Lisbeth's mom said that a few weeks before her murder, someone tried breaking into their home, and it's now left them wondering if this was the same intruder who may have tried breaking in again, but was taken by surprise that Lisbeth was home. Raphael has since been booked into the Jackson County Jail and charged with capital murder. This story is just absolutely heartbreaking. Lisbeth's mom had her when she was just 16 years old herself. She said that they grew up together and it was just them against the world. The two had just moved to Edna last year, which makes the story even more heartbreaking. Lisbeth was described as bubbly, happy, and confident, and she dreamed of becoming a nurse. Her face lit up whenever she cheered for her high school, and she'll be very missed. This should have never happened. I've attached a GoFundMe set up for the Medina family to help get them through this horrific time. And if you'd like to show your support and keep up to date with the information on the case, go follow the Facebook group Justice for Lisbeth Medina.
What happened after this girl took this webcam selfie is truly terrifying. It was the 16th of March 2012 in Morgan Hill, California. Sierra Lamar was a 15-year-old student just about to leave to go to school that day. She was a popular cheerleader with loads of friends. Prior to leaving for school, she quickly took a selfie on her computer webcam, then left to head for the bus. It was on the way to the bus stop that she seemingly vanished into thin air. She never turned up for school that day, which was extremely unusual for Sierra, and the last time she was heard of via text was 7:11 a.m. that morning. She had texted her friend and it seemed like everything was normal, but at 6 p.m. that afternoon, her mum found out she had never got to school. Unnervingly, it wasn't long before her phone was found in a nearby field. This was very concerning for her family, but police maintain they didn't expect foul play. However, when more of her belongings were discovered, concern around the community spread that something horrible may have happened. A pink, juicy bag was found at the side of the road and inside was some neatly folded clothing. Locals banded together on the hunt for the missing teenager. Interestingly, Sierra's dad was actually a registered S offender, but he was ruled out early on. Time went on with seemingly no leads, and heartbreakingly, Sierra's English teacher kept her desk empty for the rest of that year. Meanwhile, Sierra's belongings that had been found were sent for testing. This is when police had a breakthrough. The forensic team found that DNA from her jeans matched 21-year-old Antolin Garcia Torres. His DNA was luckily already on police databases from when he'd been charged for previous crimes, including battery. Investigators secretly surveilled him to collect evidence, and after 2 months they arrested him. His car was captured on CCTV the morning that Sierra had vanished. Police seized the vehicle and found her DNA on the door handle as well as a strand of her hair. There was an issue though, they still hadn't found Sierra. Although she was presumed dead, they still couldn't locate her body. On the 14th of March 2015, the search for Sierra was stood down. It had been an agonising 3 years for her family. The jury found Antolin guilty of Sierra's murder. He was also found guilty of attempted assaults on 3 women in car parks. He had used a stun gun in one of the assaults and had accidentally dropped it and left his fingerprints on it for police to collect. He got life without parole but has still refused to disclose where Sierra's body is.
These are the worst deaths imaginable, and this one is truly horrifying. On April 10th, 2018, 16-year-old Kyle Plush was in the parking lot of Seven Hills School and drove there in the family's minivan. And he was just there to practice tennis and nothing more. But he went to the 3rd row of the minivan and reached over to grab his tennis equipment. But as he was reaching down, his knee hit the bottom of the seat and something unexpected and truly horrifying happened. So the seat literally flipped and it turned Kyle upside down. So now the upper half of his body was trapped with the seat pressing up against his chest. And at 3:14 p.m. that afternoon, Kyle was able to call 911. And immediately when the 911 operator answered, Kyle immediately started screaming, "Help, help, I'm stuck in my van." The dispatcher kept trying to figure out where Kyle was located and he just kept saying 7 Hills. But the dispatcher couldn't pick up what he was saying after 7 Hills. And in the 911 call, you can actually hear Kyle banging against the window and screaming that he desperately needs help. The call went on for 3 minutes but then got disconnected, and the dispatcher then tried to call Kyle back. But it went straight to voicemail, and at 3:21 p.m. that day, officers were sent to that location Kyle said. They arrived at 3:26 p.m. and searched everything but couldn't find Kyle. And they then closed out the request and just went about their days, as Kyle was still stuck in this awful position. Then at 3:35 p.m., Kyle calls 911 again, saying the same things like, "I'm stuck in my van, please help, this isn't a joke." He then said, "I don't think I have that much time left. Please tell my mom I love her." And the sad part is, officers were still there when he made this call. But for some reason, this information was not given to the officers. Just to give you a visual, the Star was where Kyle Plush was parked. And I don't know exactly where the officers were searching in this area, but they obviously didn't find him. And 6 hours after his first 911 call, his father went to the school and found him. Kyle was dead, and he died a slow and painful death from asphyxia due to chest